So welcome everyone to this EPP Group talk here in the European Parliament on the upcoming climate talks that will be in Dubai very soon. And we're looking at how we can limit the increase in temperature to 1.5% beyond pre-industrial levels. That is the mission of the Conference of the Parties, COP number 28. And joining us will be one of the people who will actually be there in Dubai with the EPP, Lidia Pereira. You're on the Environment Committee. You're also the EPP Group's lead negotiator on the Parliament's resolution on COP28, what your expectations are on that. And you're also president of YEP, that's the youth of the EPP Group. What are some of the youth telling you about what you should be doing over at that COP? And it's not your first one either. You've been to two others.
No, it's not. Hello, Chris. First of all, thanks for the invitation. I'm always delighted to share the thoughts with in this format.
Great.
Well, there's a lot going on. There is obviously the COP28 in Dubai taking place in the next few weeks, which is very ambitious. But every time we talk about any COP, any multilateral conference, there's always high expectations, and then there's a bit of a frustration with the outcome of those conferences. But I think they are the right place, the right forum to achieve global commitments, because otherwise we cannot make sure that all geographies in the world are committed in addressing climate change.
Yeah.
And this being said, I think it is quite clear that if we compare to 10 years ago, there was not the same public support for the need of addressing environment and climate change.
Yeah, and about 10 years ago, you were on that model European Union.
It is true, here in Strasbourg.
Way back when,
far from dreaming that I would be here now shaping European policy. But the main point here is the commitment to address environment was first and foremost put in the political agenda by the younger generations. We can discuss, we can argue whether certain protests or ways of manifest are consequent, you know, if they deliver
what impact
something.
They have, yeah, right.
I can argue that some don't, but obviously the truth is environment became high priority in the political agenda. And the European Union has responded in a very high-level action. And if we remember that in the middle of the pandemic, we approved the European climate law, which one could think that because of the priorities of the moment, that was to respond to the urgency of COVID. But still, environment was there, and we were able to approve the European climate law. And the further actions that followed, Fit for 55 package.
Cutting emissions 55% in the European Union by 2030.
Exactly.
Right.
So this is all actions that the EU has been undertaking and showing to the world that it is possible to go on a path for decarbonization.
Okay, so that leads us to this next thing about climate diplomacy.
Yes.
And you're one of those sort of climate diplomats, or you're going to be going there in a sense, right?
Well, in a way, you can say that.
But what's the importance here of climate diplomacy? Why does the EU and the EPP Group want that diplomacy to be wielded to a greater effect?
Well, because, as I said, we cannot expect that we mitigate climate change all alone.
Right.
Europeans all alone cannot do it. So we need to bring other big players to the table, in particular the US, India and China.
Yep.
This is one side of the coin. The other is, like, we cannot go or be hypocrites, because we have to be strong on our messages, for example, for countries as China, that have been opening coal factories.
Yeah, they're building a lot of renewables.
They're building a lot of coal plants, and then we are buying the batteries. So we need also to be we need to acknowledge that this is not going to be sustainable in the long run, or it is even an hypocrisy from the West, if you want. And I think we need to be a bit self-critic to ourselves in negotiating with the other geographies to make sure that we are in line and that we're going to meet the goals in the fair way.
And the goals,
this is one.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
This is one. Another thing that I wanted to share is that I think we must fight greenwashing. There is now, environment is high on the agenda.
Right.
The commitment for carbon neutrality is there.
That's great. The words are there.
The words are there.
Where are the actions?
Exactly. And we have to ensure that those actions are just not, for aesthetics purposes.
Yes.
It has to be from, in the whole value chain of the things that we buy, that we acquire. And so we need to fight strongly greenwashing. And actually, that is something that the EU has been very as well a leader on several other topics like carbon removals or greens claims or the empowering citizens' rights on this front.
Everybody has a responsibility there.
Everyone has a
Companies, governments,
responsibility.
businesses, right?
Indeed.
Yeah.
So this is something that we need to make sure that in this COP28, even though I think COP28 will be marked by the global stocktake, it will be a moment to assess whether everyone is doing what it takes to meet the Paris Agreement targets.
Right.
And this will be a defining moment, I think, for the objectives that we have collectively.
In part because the UN says, their Framework Convention on Climate Change, that's the UNFCCC, they say to limit global warming to 1.5% centigrade above pre-industrial levels, the emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, must peak before 2025, this is what I'm reading, and at the latest, and decline 43% by 2030. Now,
exactly.
The Fit for 55 means if we do follow through in the European Union, we're cutting by 55% by 2030. So we're beating that goal, but not the rest, not a lot of other countries around the world.
And in the European perspective, there is, I just referred to that, carbon removals will be a defining legislation because we can only meet those targets if we remove carbon from the atmosphere. Otherwise, if we go only for the mitigation, we don't meet the goals.
Right. Right, so that's a very key thing, not only for the European Union, but for other countries around the world.
Another thing that I think it is very important to put on the table is the shift to renewable energy. That's one of the claims that we make in the Parliament resolution. We want to end the fossil fuels subsidies in exchange for investing more on renewable energy, in particular clean technologies.
Right.
The European Union is a front runner on clean technologies, and we should enable all the startups and this ecosystem that is emerging, making sure that we scale up sufficiently and that we can cover the needs for renewable energy resorting to clean technologies.
Yeah, and there are other places around the world that need to do that too.
Yeah.
What about on aid, the aid of the developing world especially? What do we need to do there?
So the financial commitment is key. We need to keep supporting developing countries through loss and damage funds and other.
That was agreed at the last one.
Agreed on that.
And we got to make sure that funding comes through.
Exactly.
Too.
And that's one of the blocking points so far.
Yeah.
But there's the other side of this discussion in supporting developing countries, that is in the transfer of knowledge for those regions.
Right.
Because sometimes we are not talking about financial need, we are talking about knowledge need.
It's knowledge,
they need
technology.
Knowledge, technology.
Tech transfer.
And we have this responsibility coming from most developed countries to make sure that we enable as well the developing countries with the knowledge, techniques. For example,
what's an example of
artificial intelligence, predicting weather disasters to prevent those communities from being affected with casualties or damages to their assets, infrastructure. So
the expertise, like the data from Copernicus, for instance, can help.
For example, it can
our
help
satellites,
a lot.
Our eyes in the sky.
Exactly, but as well on the adaptation to climate change, because we also have to be fair on this talk. There's a lot of climate change effects that are irreversible, and there's communities being affected on a daily basis because of climate change.
Sure.
And that affects, for example, food security. So how are we going to support those communities in looking for other sources of either food or energy? We need to look at that.
Yeah.
So we need to be more proactive in transferring this know-how to these communities.
Now, let me switch a little bit to the domestic side. And it also involves international because on the trade aspect, where a lot of companies in Europe will say, okay, great, Lydia, that's a great idea, that's what we have to do. Well, wait a minute, that could put me at a disadvantage on trade, where other governments and other businesses out there are not playing ball when it comes to the climate, and they're going to have an advantage over me. So how do we deal with that part?
So we have different, we've been discussing different ways of dealing with that. One of them is CBAM, which can be a little, if you want,
the
infamous
carbon border adjustment mechanism.
Carbon border adjustment mechanism, as well on the deforestation.
Which puts an extra tariff on certain products that come into the European Union.
Exactly, to equal the level playing field between the European countries and third countries.
For those that are
because otherwise they might take advantage, as you just referred to.
Right.
So
by not cleaning up with their operations, their production.
And if you want, it is even unfair. So we are doing a lot to mitigate climate change, but all the others just go around and they try to argue that, well, we are still in a developing phase, so you did a lot
not our thing,
in the past 50 years, so now it's our turn. Well, that's a great discussion with some elements of truth, obviously. But the context is different from 50 years ago. And now we are facing the possibility of increasing global temperature, which has heavy impacts on everyone.
A climate emergency that this parliament actually voted and approved.
And if we want to protect the planet, we also want to protect the future generations, so we have to act collectively.
Right, exactly. I think we're good. Unless you have any other points, I think I think you've made the points. What's your feeling going to Dubai this time? Is it hope? Is it determination? Is it, oh my God, we're not going to get what we want? What do you think?
No, I think it's determination. And I think if we look at the capacity that the EU has been showing to the world in terms of, sometimes we argue and we are not so happy with the amount of legislation that we are approving and has impacts on European businesses. But the truth is that this legislation serves as tools for climate diplomacy, and this shows to other countries in the world that it is possible to decarbonize and to offer a different model, so shifting from linear economy to a circular economy. And I think this is quite positive. And finishing with this, the EU is doing a lot. Let's be reasonable. Also in the conversations with the other political groups that often want to go one step further, we are doing a lot, and we are doing it in a credible way. And so we should put our efforts on the things that we are achieving in the EU and trying to convince the others in doing the same.
Yeah, and I think maybe we should just mention one thing about how this should be win-win. In 100%. Terms of jobs, too. I mean, a lot of people are worried out there, what's going to happen to my job?
Jobs is often neglected in this process, but we can open the door for so many opportunities that also relate to the creation of new jobs.
Right.
That we should look into this circular economy transition in a very positive way, with huge impact also in our well-being, but also economic prosperity. So this is something that we should not lose sight of. Yeah,
for Europe or for the rest of the world. It should be an opportunity to create more employment.
Indeed.
Lydia Pereira, thank you very much. Chris. And thanks to everybody for listening and watching. Keep in mind, at EPP Group, for any kind of social networking you'd like to do on this discussion, and look at eppgroup.eu for any further information on Lydia's mission to Dubai at COP28. I'm Chris Burns. See you next time.